Hi guys, my name is Kirsty. Welcome to a new thing I'm doing on my channel. I'm so excited today to be sharing with you something new, so welcome back to Upside Down Books and welcome to the Non-Fiction Diaries.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte giorno di torno.
Recently, I've become more and more obsessed with the non-fiction genre, and I feel like I'm the only person in the world that loves it this much, but I have just discovered, and found out that you can learn so many interesting things from non-fiction, which sounds like a stupid thing to say, but like, it's a real revelation that I've had. Over the last few years, I have been reading more non-fiction, and in particular, I read David Attenborough's A Life on Our Planet, and that was sort of the game changer. So we're talking about 2 years ago, I think, roughly speaking, that book came out along with the documentary, maybe a year, I don't know, I can't count. And as I was flicking through reading the book, I was so taken with how different David Attenborough's material is these days, because anyone who is a similar age to me probably also relates to growing up with the David Attenborough documentaries as something that your parents sat you down in front of because it was pretty and it was interesting and it was beautiful, and sort of as we grew up, much like the Harry Potter series in some regards, there's a comparison for you, things became more mature and more serious, and as you reach adulthood, he's coming up with these new documentaries that are really quite serious and upsetting, and it's all reflective of the direction that the world is going in terms of climate change. And I was reading his book, and I got to the references section, which I did not read because I'm not a psychopath, but I did have a flick through and realised the sheer volume of resources that he'd used to pull together this thing. And I thought, I don't read any of this. I don't go out and seek any of this information. I take it all from different sources. And it really kicked me into this mode of thinking where I was questioning where I was getting my information from and asking myself who is telling me these things? Where am I learning them? Am I actually reaching out to understand more about our world, or am I just accepting whatever's presented to me? And the answer was definitely the latter. And I realised that my main source of information outside of David Attenborough for things like climate change was social media or various articles from various sources, and not all of them reputable. In conjunction with this, I also then came across a copy of the New York Review of Books, and they had done a feature on University of Chicago Press's collection of non-fiction climate change books. What initially caught my eye about this article was actually the covers, and it just took me down a whole new way of thinking. So this is what I'm here to do with you today. I'm going to start this new series. It's going to be on a playlist on my channel so you guys can see everything if you're interested in keeping up with what I'm reading in this area, but I'm going to be starting this series called the Non-Fiction Diaries. At the moment it's going to consist of my experiences reading climate change non-fiction because that is where my focus is, but who knows, maybe in the future I will expand it to other topics as well. The idea is that not all of us have time or the bother to read non-fiction books. They're heavy going, they're slow, they're not always super interesting, they certainly don't have dragons in them, and so I wanted to share with you what I've learned, what I've taken away, and what actions the books have inspired me to do after reading them, so that you can reap some of the benefits of these non-fiction books without having to read them yourself, and so that we can start a conversation, I guess, amongst ourselves about these things. I just thought it would be interesting. I thought some people might be interested to know what are in these books and perhaps appreciate some knowledge being shared, but I think it is so important, so I wanted to do that for you today. So this is basically part review and part me sharing knowledge with you. What I share with you is going to be entirely based on what I've taken away from the book, which will be reflective of what I know, what I don't know, and therefore what's interesting to me and has caught my attention. So you might already know these things, or you might think that I'm an idiot for not having known them, but that is the point. I have to challenge my knowledge, and if I am coming across information that seems silly that I don't know, then I'm thrilled that I finally learnt about it, and I have put an end to the ignorance in whatever area that was in. The way that I've been choosing these books is I have actually primarily been just looking at the University of Chicago Press's catalogue. They have an epic collection of non-fiction books about climate change, and I know that the publishing team behind UCP is actually quite reputable and specialised, so I trust that the information they're putting out in their books from the specialists and researchers that are writing them will be a good source of knowledge. So for now that's where I'm looking, but I will eventually look further abroad. So today we're going to be talking about Future Sea, which is this small novel all about the sea and the fishing industry, and it's by Deborah Rowan Wright. Now, who is Deborah Wright? So she's an independent researcher who writes about marine conservation. She's been published before in various reputable publications about the work that she's done on conservation and fisheries management, and she's obviously written this book with University of Chicago Press. So I wanted to discuss how this was as a reading experience being a non-fiction book, and one of the first ones that isn't a memoir that I've read for a really long time, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this. I loved the reading experience. I actually found this quite entertaining, very easy to read, and not too heavy going at all. The book is sort of spliced with a bit of anecdote and a lot of fact, so we get, just at the right moments where it might become a bit too fact heavy or a bit too intense, we get a little story about Deborah going out and speaking to various people to gather her information, or about a personal experience she's had within the marine world and how it relates to what she's about to talk about next. There was so much I learned from this, and I think I learnt more than I was expecting to. This was definitely a great first step for opening my eyes to realise how much I do have to learn in all areas, so I wanted to share with you some of the main things that I took away from this. So the main theme of this book is talking about ocean management and protection, and as it currently stands, we do have lots of legislation and international treaties that protect parts of the ocean or the high seas and how that should be managed, but for the most part they're completely ignored. It becomes a case of it benefits everyone to turn a blind eye to everyone else so that they can overfish and exploit the seas, and so that's exactly what happens, and it's really concerning. And I didn't quite, like, I knew there was a problem with the fisheries, but I didn't realise that it was this bad. And so the main thing that she's talking about is it's not just independent reserves or areas that should be protected, but the whole ocean should be protected, and it should be small areas that are open and available to fishing, and that would allow the fish populations to recover. Because as it stands, most of the fish populations have decreased by whopping numbers of up to 90+%. There's so few of the fish left, and the way that it has impacted on the food chain with predators down to prey is really setting everything out of whack, and is terrible. Not only that, but there's loads and loads of toxic and harmful impacts of current fishing practices, and I'll talk about a few of those things as I get further into this. Of course, one of the main things that she's acknowledging in this book is the fact that people just don't care enough, and it's really hard to get people to care to do something about it, especially when you're dealing with such a broad sweep of countries that are in all sorts of different stages of development with different degrees of poverty and education levels, so it's very hard to initiate and enact those sort of rules that are needed when everyone's coming from a very different place with very different agendas. One of the most harmful practices is deep sea bottom trawling, as it's very indiscriminate in what it destroys, and it creates a lot of waste, is very destructive, and can take out a lot of undersea habitats rather than just catching the food that we're after. One really interesting statistic she gave was a comparison between global spending on military and defense costs compared to how much it would cost for a year to protect the entire ocean. So in order to protect the entire ocean for an annual period, she estimated that it would cost up to $77 billion. But this is in contrast that for a year, the global expenditure on defense is $1.8 trillion. So it's a way, way, way lower number than what we're spending on defense, and it gives it some perspective as to priorities and where money is going. One of the most interesting things that I learned was actually the harmful impacts of sunscreen. So I didn't know this, and I have spoken to other people since who say that they have known this before, but I have never known this in relation to coral bleaching. So some of the sunscreens that you can buy, in particular spray-on stuff, contains these two chemicals. I can't pronounce either of them, but these two chemicals which, when you get into the water, in the pool or in the ocean, it all ends up in the water. These chemicals can get washed off and they disperse into the ocean, and these chemicals are really, really toxic to coral reefs, and just the smallest amount of these in the water can cause the corals to bleach and die, and it is shocking how little it was needed. I think the comparison was something along the lines of the lowest concentration to see a toxicity effect, so for the corals to bleach, was 62 parts per trillion, which is the equivalent to 1 drop of water in 6.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and there's way more of that than that going into equivalent areas within the ocean. So I had no idea about this, and this was something that was an eye-opener and a really interesting fact to me, and something that we can all look at on the shelves to work out what is appropriate and what is not. Is something you could look up on the internet if you want to find out what these chemicals are and how they work. I won't try and butcher it by relaying it to you now, but that was something I learned and something I'll be keeping an eye out in the future, though I do believe in several countries, including Australia, that these things have been banned, so they shouldn't technically be in these products, but it's always good to just double check. One of the other things that she talked about a lot was the salmon industry, and this is something I've heard lots and lots about but never really read in depth of, and there are lots of other books I know I can read more on, in particular one book called Toxic I'm quite interested to pick up now, and it's how toxic the salmon industry is. And basically the bottom line is, if you could eat a different fish, just do so. So the way that salmon is farmed in such high density nets, still in the ocean, but a high density population within the nets, means that disease is rife, and the sheer degree of antibiotics needed to be pumped into the fish in order to keep them healthy is just perpetually increasing as they become more and more resilient. So you've got these fish that are very much so heavily medicated and not doing so great at all, and all the fish that are dying just collect at the bottom, so you get all that festering and disgusting rotting carcasses at the bottom of the net. And if you get any animals that do escape out of the net, then they can introduce disease and all sorts of things into the ocean, and it's not good. And I also learned that fishing industries can buy a dye to change the flesh of the salmon. So because salmon often is just a grey colour when it is farm fished, they actually go to this company, and again I believe this is also banned in Australia and other places, which will give them whatever colour that they want to feed to the fish and cause them to have that lovely pink colour. I didn't know about that, that was news to me, and I thought that that was quite horrific with how much augmentation is going on with these salmon and how distressing and horrible the life of the salmon would be, and just how generally unhealthy that animal is to eat, potentially because of the way that it's being farmed, supposedly in a better way than just taking from wild stocks of salmon, but it's not really the better alternative in terms of what comes onto our plate and what we're eating. And that sort of linked onto the next thing that she talked about, which was ghost fishing. So when you have these kinds of methods of fishing and you have nets and pots and all sorts, and they get discarded when they're no longer of use. And because the way that we're fishing now is so overly efficient because of technology, that's what's allowing us to catch so many things, and also makes us much more wasteful. So instead of using things like bamboo or hemp in the ropes, which are biodegradable, we have nylon, which is not, and which stays in the ocean for a long time. So ghost fishing is when those discarded items are still killing and capturing animals. Even blue whales, there was reports of that happening and killing them because they're not cleaned up and they're not disposed of nicely, and it's a huge problem, and there are so many different charities out there that are basically looking to clean all those up and funding money to clean the oceans up in that way. This is something I don't think I've really ever heard about in any in-depth amount before, but it was something I was fascinated to learn about, and something that I find quite deeply distressing in the sort of wasteful nature of it, and the fact that it has such serious consequences as well. One positive note that she did talk about was there's a place in New Zealand called Goat Island Reserve, and it was one of the first in New Zealand reserves that was very successful in showing how quickly and how well these seas can bounce back when they're left alone, and New Zealand is a shining example, as it is in many ways, about protecting their oceans and their sea areas and letting them bounce back and the populations grow. And there's quite a few examples from all over the world where places that have been put down as reserves, though it's not enough on a global scale, it's, you know, at least a step in the right direction, and it's incredible to see and hear about how quickly the populations come back if they are left alone. It is, well, there was one example where there was beach cleanup in India on one of the beaches, and after 7 years, for the first time in over 20 years, an olive Ridley turtle came and laid eggs on that beach. So it's just, you know, it's like a lovely returning of life, and those are the stories that we need to hear to keep this with some sort of positive shining light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Something that Deborah talks about as well, that David Attenborough talked about quite a lot in his most recent documentaries, is the need for slowing down population growth, and doing that by providing equal opportunities in education for women. I find that this sort of societal problem has such an interesting impact on the environment, because the basis of it being that when women are equally educated to men and are given the same opportunities, more of them will be able to choose how big a family they want to have, or if they want to have any at all, which usually means that the families will be smaller, because many women do not want to have as many children as they do, and they have no control over their bodies, and so they end up having a lot of children, which in turn adds on to the population growth and overpopulation, and so giving women back that choice is actually a really easy and simple way, in theory, to reduce and stabilise the population of the world. Obviously, by having a smaller population, there's less demand on food and other things like that just slow down a bit and make things a bit more manageable. One of the most fascinating statistics that I read in here was the fact that there was this one episode of Blue Planet 2 that David Attenborough did that was about the whole ghost fishing thing. And they found that 88% of people who watched that episode adjusted their lifestyles to reduce their use of single-use plastics. So that's sort of a summary of the kind of things that we were talking about in this book, and it was really, really interesting to read, and I found it very digestible. And I wanted to talk about the actions that this has inspired me to do since reading it. I think one of the biggest pros of this book is the fact that there are lots of things laid down for the average person, so someone with not a lot of money, not a lot of time, and no perhaps no interest in engaging in very serious levels of conservation and want you to look more at the home front and the things that we can do. And I 100% fit that bill. I don't want to go out marching on the streets. I'm not rolling in money and I do not have a lot of spare time, but I want to feel like there is something I'm doing to help fight for the planet. And so among many other things, there were a bunch of websites that the author recommends checking out and going to and potentially donating to, and this was the path I decided to go down. Now I will try and leave some links below in the description for you. I won't leave everything that she suggested that we can do because I think the easiest thing if you're really interested is to go and get a copy of the book yourself and to have a thumb through, because there's lots and lots of different things in here that you can do, but the one that really stuck out for me was the Olive Ridley project. So this is protecting sea turtles and it is founded in the UK, and they work out of off the coast of Kenya and a couple of other places, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And basically I decided that I wanted to try and make some sort of impact to support people who do have the ability to make a very real difference. And so I had a look at what they offer, and these guys had lots of different varieties. So for me, I picked out of their suggested donation rates, I did pick the smallest one because that's simply what money allows for me, and it just means that I can keep track of what's going on, I can get their regular newsletters, and I can know that that money is going towards some people out there who are doing a really great thing in nursing sea turtles that are sick, in removing ghost fishing gear and providing medication, and just in general helping that small area of life try and bounce back. So that brings me to the end of this video and everything I wanted to discuss with you today. So thanks so much for sticking around. I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know in the comments down below if there's anything else that you want to hear about in these videos, anything you want me to discuss more or less. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I would love to hear if any of you go out and start up a donation anywhere, or if you go out and read this book. I'm not saying that you have to, it is not for everyone, I just would love to hear if you do, and I just want to share my experience and the opportunities that are there for you if you're like me and looking for something more to do in terms of climate change. So that's everything for today. So other than that, I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.